Google, I'll actually kick off our workshop by doing a case study to really understand why such initiative did not work and what are some of the lessons that we can have that if we want to participate in such initiatives again, what are the lessons learned? Then we will be talking about the role of data and how we think data as a new fabric can actually help communities to become better and stronger. And then during the course of the presentation, my team uses a tool. You can just, keep a note of this on your browsers. You go to a website called menti.com, menti.com. And in order to make the conversation more interactive, we will ask you some questions. You can answer those questions in real time, and then we can do some real time polling to see what our friends think about particular subjects during the course of the presentation. So the context of our workshop is to see if we can keep data privacy preserved and making it owned by the community members. Can it be used as an asset to make communities healthier and more collaborative? As I'm sure you know, data and ownership of the data, accessing data is becoming something important all around the world. And what we want to discuss is that how can we come up with new protocols and paradigms that data can actually be seen as a catalyst for making communities better. To give you a bit of a background of our team, our university is located in downtown Toronto, not too dissimilar to the urban structure of MIT, a very urban campus. And these are some of my colleagues that most of them are on the call with me. I'll do a quick introduction on their behalf, and as part of their presentation, you will be hearing from them in a moment. Sheldon Levy, former president of Ryerson University, Deputy Minister of Education. He was on the board of Waterfront Toronto. He's serving on boards of number of hospitals, and recently he's awarded the Order of Canada. Richard Lachman, my dear colleague and my collaborator, also an MIT Media Lab grad, we are working together to also build co-curricular programs to, while we are doing research, we also educate our students to participate in data-driven activities, but through a creative lens. Natalie Alvarez is our Associate Dean of Research, working closely with us to expand the CSL Toronto team. Katie Lee, a graduate student, also worked with the CSL at Media Lab. Velko and David are working for Flybits, which is a spin-off from our group, and recently they managed to secure a relatively large grant from the federal government of Canada to demonstrate how we can build data hubs across the country. Essentially, data hubs that can allow us to bring corporations, non-for-profit organizations, and even individuals to share data on a privacy preserved fashion. And we would like to talk to you a little bit about that because that grant is also allowing us to expand our collaboration within the CSL network. Marjan is a collaborator with us in the group. She's also a professor at Oberå University in Sweden. And Sebastian is our Europe student at MIT, working with us closely to build knowledge bases for communities. The settings we have always believed in no walls and open spaces. So hopefully post-COVID, you can visit us at our labs. It's a very interdisciplinary group of people coming together from, undergraduate programs to PhD programs from different disciplines and working on data-driven and digital activities. One of the unique things that we do in Toronto is that we apply some of our research work in this area and apply them into courses. So we created these programs called the Super Course program that we bring students from different disciplines within a semester, and we allow them to collaborate to apply their know-how in participation with city stakeholders. So we involve non-for-profit organizations, parks, galleries, And then they work with our students over a course of a semester, whether they are interested in design, in campus planning, in design, in performance. And our goal is to move some of those innovations into um, the market or in the community in collaboration with our partners. And so far, it has been a successful program. The last program I want to highlight, which we are seeing more interest around that, is how we look at artificial intelligence through a creative lens. So instead of just treating it as a computer science discipline, we now build models that teaches data and artificial intelligence to students coming from the creative background, from the design background. And my colleague Richard is on the call with us now, and we have seen some very interesting things that when these students graduate, they can bring a lot of value across our city when they go and continue their work with our participating partners. So hopefully that gives you an overview on what we do in Toronto CSL Lab, and hopefully after COVID, we will get a chance to meet some of you in person. Now, we will be starting with the first part of our presentation, and that's a case study on sidewalk labs. There are different views on sidewalk labs. Some people refer to it as failure, some people refer to it as success and learning. But because it started in Toronto and we were involved in that project, we thought that we use our personal lens and share with you what happened, how an amazing initiative like that can relatively fail and leave the city with grand visions, but not very effective execution. And we are hoping that the end result of this workshop can be seen as some takeaways for colleagues around the world who are participating in such initiatives. So I just thought before introducing Sheldon, this is an article from Financial Times when the initiative started. And this is a very similar article with a similar message about 3 years after on why it failed. So we want to actually talk about that. So with no further ado, I'm pleased to introduce you to Sheldon Levy, and he will give you a quick background on himself and also his views on Cyber Lab. Sheldon, please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Hossein, for the introduction, and just welcome to colleagues at Ryerson, MIT, and more recently, where I'm moving for a bit of time, to new colleagues at Canada West University in Vancouver. Welcome to everyone. Maybe I could frame the Sidewalk Labs history the following way. In October of 2017, Sidewalk Labs, and as Hussein said, it's a parent company of Alphabet, announced their plans to develop roughly 12 acres of land. But their site wasn't really on the 12 acres of land. That was sort of the pilot to move into an 800-acre parcel of land. And that 800 acres is one of the largest areas of underdeveloped urban land in North America. So they won the RFP back in 2017 and came to Toronto in 2018. And by their own documentation, they began consultation, and to quote them, they consulted well over 1,000 Torontonians. In May 2020, the project was abandoned, uh, no doubt due to COVID, but there were probably, in their estimation, many reasons why they abandoned. So they came in 2017 and left in 2020. My role, I was a former board member of Waterfront Toronto, which is the company that is supported by all three levels of government that have the responsibility of developing the Toronto waterfront. And I was asked by the Waterfront Board to be part of a very small team that wrote the final report on the project. And so it is that background and my background that I will move into, as Hussein said, lessons learned. I'm going to begin by saying these were my lessons learned. Other people will no doubt share some of these and have other observations. When I look back at the project and talk about lessons learned, I think to myself, some of them should have been obvious. But others, when I think back on it, I don't even know how I would have ever seen it. It was only being part of the experience that allowed these lessons to happen. So I will begin by, and they're not in a priority order except the last one, which is the most important. So when Sidewalk Labs came to Toronto, uh, there was lots of discussions on data privacy, the use of data, how do you delete data? You could imagine all the thousands of different discussions. And the lesson I learned was that we were asking Sidewalk Labs to define really what should have been government policy. We didn't have a GDPR or anything like that. And so we ended up looking at the issues that would have been defined in the GDPR as if we're negotiating with Sidewalk Labs and Alphabet. So one of the first lessons I would say I've learned is that unless you have legal structures to define the relationships, I don't even know how you begin because the private sector has different interests than the public sector, and it is the elected officials that have to set up those guideposts for us, and we didn't have them. And so there was a lot of frustration, a lot of debate, but at the end of the day, my takeaway was, why did we begin this project when, as a country, we didn't have, in quotes, our GDPR, which was a critical boundaries for the discussion. So takeaway number one. Takeaway number two, I should have seen, I live it, and that is cities can talk the talk about innovation and risk. They can't walk the talk of innovation, of risk. To quote a counselor, a senior counselor, in the middle of all of the sidewalk labs, I had a discussion with this counselor, and he said, I'm not elected to take risk. I said, you're not elected to take risk. Why are we in this? Because there are elements of risk in this. So this isn't that Sidewalk Labs were taking existing tools and applying them to new problems. Sidewalk Labs was very clear they were going to invent new tools to solve new types of problems. And in those tools, there was going to be an element of risk because it was looking forward. So my observation was that we talked the ability to take risk and we talked about innovation, but we did not have the ability to walk it. And let me give another very good example. Sidewalk Labs had the idea that why do we build roads that every time there's a problem, we have to tear up the roads and stop the traffic, etc. Why can't we build roads like pavers? And then when there's a problem, just like the tile in your bathroom, or even easier than the tile in your bathroom, you pick up a paver and replace it because the pavers are smart pavers, smart roads, etc. Sounds good. That problem was taken to the works department in the city of Toronto that said, there is no way we can't even afford to do the roads that we are now doing. We don't have the staff. This is way too high risk. And what was observed to me, we're asking the wrong people. The ability to take risk and to be able to take a leadership has to come from the top. And what I learned was that no matter how dedicated the mayor and everyone was, I don't think they appreciated the risk associated with the project we were undertaking. And it literally scared people on what happens if it failed. And there was always the contingencies, of course. That was number two. Number three, I'll just say simply that the process had to be an open book in all aspects, not only monetarily, but with regard to policy, with regard to data, everything had to be open book. But I would go further than that. I think what had to be embedded in that was the equivalent of an oversight committee that included some senior person within the community that was trusted and respected by the community, and that person provided regular oversight of the project in all capacities. That person was invited to the meetings of both sides and really was the translator to the citizens of what was going on, and it had to be a trusted leader. The fourth observation I had is no matter how much you talk about communications, there wasn't enough and there will never be enough. And if it isn't one of the top priorities, it will not work. And just because you think there's nothing to communicate, keep communicating. Number five turned out to be one that can you hear me still okay?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. Number five turned out to be uh, one that that was obvious, but very, very complex. And I want to begin this one by just sharing with you a very quick story. When the project was announced, the Prime Minister joined Eric Schmidt in Toronto, and I'm gonna I'm gonna quote uh, uh, from Eric. Eric at that meeting in public, large gathering to announce the project coming to Toronto, quote, says that he is enormously thankful to Canadians for the country's artificial intelligence innovation. He went on to say, we now use it throughout our entire business and it's a major driver of our corporate success. He said at Google's Go North conference, so we owe you a lot. Well, from that day on, the concern was we have given away our talent, we have given away our IP, and it's gone south of the border to make Google Alphabet extremely rich. Are we into another exercise of giving away our talent, giving away our IP? And this is the big project of Sidewalk Labs. So the big lesson learned, you have to have a very clear understanding of what you could call the economic of the exercise and a fair process so any company, any entrepreneur can benefit. And it goes beyond open data. It has to be part of the clear understanding that whatever results from an economic point of view is totally open with no monopolistic, and that goes to the data and every other aspect of it. But the economic implications were a big problem. Number six takeaway is a conundrum I found. We kept on hearing, solve the real problems. You're solving all the glitzy problems. Solve the real problems we have. But the problem of solving the real problems is that the whole exercise was to solve problems that would exist if you didn't have a smart city. They were forward looking. The population were looking presently. So how do you begin to communicate? You're not solving problems only of today. What your solutions are is not to have the problems of tomorrow. This became extremely difficult as a communication because people were focused not only on today, they didn't understand the problems of tomorrow or didn't believe them in all cases. So the last two I will be brief on, but those are the two I did not see. Number one, uh, it's was that what the citizens were saying is, we elect people called our mayor and our other individuals that represent our communities through a democratic process of doing the types of things that you're now allocating to a private company. This subverts the democratic process. The democratic process should have been that if you wanted to do this, the mayor should have run on uh, 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 on a campaign that identified what the person was, what his mandate was, and that we as citizens would have voted on it. We are giving over government to Sidewalk Labs. This this is one of what I would say I was interpreting as hearing, that building a smart city does it uh, uh, does it come in conflict with the democratic process of responsibility for building smart city of those we elect and the people that they hire on our behalf? So the last one that I would say before I wrap up is one that I said was the most important, in that when I would put them all together, all of them, that I believe that if you don't have trust in the in of the project that is owned by the citizens, owned by the individuals doing the work, owned by uh, the, uh, the, the 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 governments, if you don't have true trust and continue to build that trust, then you will always run into all the problems that I have said and even more, because fundamentally there wasn't trust. And I remember saying to the head of Sidewalk Labs as it was ending its time in Toronto, that trust is not something that can be rushed. It truly is something that had to be earned. And despite all good efforts, I'm not criticizing, it never happened. And as a result, some of the problems that I have identified and learnings that I've identified probably would have been okay if you had the trust. But without the trust, I would say don't even try. And let me just end by saying, remember, this was going to be one of the largest projects, probably the largest project of a smart city in the world, on the largest strip of unused land of a major city in the world. This was not just a pilot on the side of a desk. This was real work. So Hussein, I'm going to pass it back to you, and happy during the course of the discussions to answer any questions.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sheldon. It's great to hear from you and someone who was very involved and really observed the project uh, from a very close distance. What we like to do, and we make sure that we have good enough time for a conversation, but let's do this. We now created these questions for you. It's the first time we use this tool, so let's see if it allows us to make it a little bit more participatory. So if you go on your browser to menti.com, should be very straightforward. I'm hoping that our friends in Taipei can also access it. And then when you go there, you can type this number and you should see this question popping up. And then you can rank these based on your view and priorities on what you think was one of the failure factors for Sidewalk. And then we'll share this with all of you and also as a takeaway after the workshop. Dave and Velko, my colleagues, will also make sure that it works and it shows up correctly, because I cannot go off full screen, so I can't access it.
Works for me, Hussein.
Perfect. Okay, so let's give it another 15 seconds and we'll proceed. Let me see if I can see the results now. If not, we'll see. Wow, look at that. Okay, so we are basically seeing some of your answers. Keep sharing. We will send all the results to you after the workshop, but shows that, you know, privacy and regulation are being seen as some of the key drivers. Okay, let's go back to, you have all the time. We have more questions for you, so feel free to add. So far, we have 36 participants. I'm sure we are going to get more. Now let's go back and continue with our conversation. Okay, so we summarized it, at least based on our view. The way I could summarize what Sheldon mentioned was that the innovation that Sidewalk wanted to bring to Toronto was well beyond the risk appetite of our elected officials. And I think the committees that we put together could not really absorb the risk and the scope of innovation that that project had. There was another thing that also the RFP that was written that Alphabet won was very abstract. So the negotiations on that project really started after the fact, which really did not help with that. Again, it was a public RFP, as Sheldon mentioned, that it did not consider partnership with local partners, local universities, local talent. So again, these were again addressed after the fact very organically, and it resulted people to become more guarded that, okay, are we collaborating with Google or Alphabet, or we are giving up our intellectual property? The biggest one for me, which is very interesting, which is aligned with our workshop, is that when we invited a company like Alphabet and we did not have the protocols and the guidelines for data privacy similar to GDPR or CCPA in California, now we do, but when Alphabet came, we didn't have to do it. Basically, the dynamics were, well, we don't have a privacy guideline. You tell us what you want to do. Well, you're asking that question from Google. And when Google said, well, here is how I want to handle data, then everyone became guarded. So at least the big one for me is if you want to do such projects in which data is going to be such an important fabric, the organization who is inviting the project should have the guidelines first, the references first, and then let others to adhere to that. And I think, as Sheldon mentioned, the committees that you put together should have, prominent senior people, because when you pass those decision making to, day-to-day activities and middle management in an organization, usually it's not going to go very well. So now I want to very quickly talk about some of the research work that we do in our group. Some of you within the CSL have seen it, but it's a focus area for us in Toronto. And we will then participate in more conversations. So one of the key things that we are doing now in Toronto and also in few other cities across Canada is to demonstrate how we can decentralize the data and really create these distributed ledgers so community members can share and own their data on a community basis. So we are now building banks of data so households can actually share their data securely and in a privacy preserved fashion. Small businesses can do the same thing, and also administrative entities. And instead of putting all of this data in a black box in a centralized database or a data lake, we are actually building local ledgers. You can use blockchain or any other technology to keep that data locally in a community. And we are testing and measuring, if we do that and include communities to participate, do we increase the level of comfort for entities and people to share their data? The goal that we have is that if you look at a community as an entity, if we have such data and then we make it easy and privacy preserved for entities to share their data, We then run models on these data to build models from that community. So let's say household models, models for small businesses, and also for other participating entities. And then we do reasoning on such data. So we can actually come up with an aggregated community model in terms of behavioral patterns, movement patterns. But we can only do this from a technical point of view. Doing this type of a federated learning is relatively easy and doable. The key question is that, well, how are we going to have access to data in order to have effective community models that we can now pass it on to our startups, to our entrepreneurs, to our companies, so they can build around that. The core of this research is not too dissimilar to what our colleagues at CSL are doing. We understand relationships between different nodes and factors in a city, correlation between employment and access to public transit. And in addition to also looking at it on a data models and statistical model, we also looking at it from an ontological and contextual model. So we are basically saying not even we can do data-driven analysis, but we can also infer causal model between these entities in a city. So without going through the details, basically the goal we have is to build simulators and tools like this. And these are 3 communities in Toronto that we are currently working with. We understand the models and behavior on each community. We can measure them against each other. But the interest that we have is that, first of all, within a community, so if the scope is one community itself, can this data be used to, let's say, giving us and the community members a better understanding of our K-12 school performance? Can parents communicate with each other more effectively? Can we provide models that you gain the ability as a community member to invest in your local coffee shop, and based on that growth will also give back to the community? And there are some interesting results that we currently have. But the one that is a little bit more complicated but interests our researcher is that, well, if you have such models from different communities, can you create some type of a healthy competition between them to see which community is doing better? And then with that, you include authorities, let's say a tax authority, to say, well, if you're applying your models to these ESG metrics that I think all of us are interested to know, here are some of the adaptive tax policy models that I can introduce to convince and encourage communities to become better, more sustainable, and then we can measure some of their ESG metrics. So it's early days for us, but as you see, the interest we have in our group, it is not just the algorithmic capabilities of building these tools, but to build tools that are very simple to use, it's easy to use, and it has a focus on data and digital literacy, because we have all seen this. If you do not have that network effect, if you do not have that participation from communities, these tools will just stay as essentially a research project. So in addition to our data work, we are also doing a lot of work on design, on user experience, on simplicity, on education, so that people are actually learning how to use their data as an asset. I'll share a few more examples with you, and then we'll go to another question. So those models that I talked about, the interesting thing for us is that we give those models to some of our students. Some of them are master's students, some of them are PhD students, and they are building different applications with that. So I showed 2 of my favorites ones with you. This is actually this is a street, our main street close to Ryerson. They use these models to build a decentralized social city navigation tool that when you're walking around the city, the ergonomics could be an app or an augmented reality interface. The recommendations that you get is based on that local data that is stored on a community level, not on a centralized black box data like Google or TripAdvisor. So within the Ryerson community, you can see that if this friend was here, he or she would have gone to this coffee shop, and he or she would have purchased if she goes to this store. And we think by building these models that allows expertise, preferences, preferential data to be shared on a privacy preserved manner, it will encourage people with more confidence to share that data. Now, this technology or this tool is only available to about 100 students within a department of the university. So they already have that comfort level that I understand who I share this data with. And that we are measuring, that does it give them more comfort and confidence to share that data. And we are also building models for that community so that when you have that knowledge base, you can then go apply that knowledge base on other channels, such as I can apply that as a lens to a food ordering app. I can apply that into a city navigation app, and I can rely on someone else's expertise on preference to navigate information. So those are some of the things that we wanted to share with you in terms of what the CSL Toronto is doing. But again, let's proceed with another question to see if we want to do that. Based on your view, do you think people are willing to share the data? And what types of data do you think, if of course the local data store is localized, which one of these data sets do you think the members are willing to share? So feel free to go to menti.com again and answer this question. So
Yes.
okay, perfect. Okay, so I think your answers are coming. It's interesting. 28, 31. So keep the answers coming. We'll share these with you. They're good, a small sample size, but very strong group of people contributing. So we'll come back to this. I want to make sure that as part of our workshop, we have enough time for a conversation. So I'll proceed to two more questions. We'll share a little bit with you with Velko and Dave on this new grant that we got and what we want to do in Canada. And then I think we can have a very interesting conversation together. So we are going to have three questions back to back because they are related. So the first one, I think you already answered. How willing are you to share these types of data with a community hub, not with a centralized corporation? Now, the third question we have for you is this one. Which existing entity can have a high potential to act as a data hub or exchange for a community? There are different views. I'll give you a bit of a background on this. Some people are like, well, this has to be, your local, provincial, municipal, or even the federal, statistic, like we call it, Stats Canada. They can do that for you. Some people are like, I'm more comfortable with a retailer or a small business owner that I trust. So that trust factor allows me to use them as a hub because you need an exchange for people to come together. Some people are saying, hey, in every single community, especially in North America, there is a bank branch. These are becoming more and more irrelevant physical spaces because banking is going digital, but you have a kind of a relative sense of trust with your bank. Why don't you repurpose them as hyper local, search hubs for that community? Or some people are saying, well, I trust more the authorities like the police office. So I'm curious to see if we want to use an existing entity. Of course, we can always go create these new entities together as a franchise. Which one do you think is best positioned to act as that hub for a data hub? Well, let's see if your answers are coming. No answers yet. Oh, there you go. Okay. Okay, so we let this is an interesting one. We want to discuss this further together. Let's go back to the last question of this section. And that is this. What are the technology areas we need to invest more to enable such data exchanges? This is more like there are different views on this. Oh, this has definitely need to be on a blockchain because we want the community to own that ledger and manage it. Um, sure, or there could be other ledger techniques that may be more relevant to this. A lot of people are interested in tokenization because in order to make the data privacy preserved, you need these types of tokens to be moved. Another area that is interesting is this notion of edge computing, that you can actually compute a lot of these locally on a device rather than on a centralized service. And of course, AI in order to predict. So feel free to submit 5 areas. This will give us some sort of a tag cloud. So you can use any um, trend or technology pillar that you feel is more relevant or not being addressed effectively when building these hubs. We'll see if it's coming, and then we'll go to the last section of our presentation. See if the tag cloud is showing up. You can always go back to previous questions and continue to provide your views. This one, we got some 35 participants, which is great. This one, we still, oh, there you go. Privacy preserving AI, blockchain, tokenization. Okay. Now, if you see these and you agree with them, if you write this again, it will grow in the tag cloud. So it will give us, you can also add new terms or just um, amplify one of the clouds that you see. Oh, 5G, NFT. Wow, that's pretty powerful. Okay. Okay, keep them coming, and I'm gonna proceed because I want to make sure we have good enough time to discuss. Now, the reason I want to share the last section of my presentation with Professor Larson and Professor Pentland, we have been doing some interesting work, and just in the past month, we secured a major grant as part of the broader group to do more work in Canada building these community hubs. So we call the project Project Canard Bleu. There is a reason we call that in Canada. In French, it means the Blue Duck Project. And basically what it is that to build these hubs around a financial institution. So use the trust, relative trust that you have with a bank, making sure that the data is protected, but then bring all the entities to share data in a decentralized fashion with a financial institution. So a supermarket, an airline, an energy company. And then instead of moving the data into one lake, we use these trusted execution environments to allowing each entity to have the rights to process their own data. So we are now coming up models that, okay, what types of data are being shared between these entities? And essentially turn it into a marketplace. What is the telco sharing? What is the airline sharing? What is the bank sharing? Where are they going to get stored? How are they going to get computed? The outcome of that as a synthesized data, who will have access to that? What are the rights of the community members to see that data? And then, of course, because we have corporate members on board, we need to basically convince them that these are the values or value adds that you will get from each entity when you share your data. So when you have a financial institution, you want to bring a telco, you want to bring a utility company around that. Our team, this is more on the business side of things, they are coming up with use cases that, okay, this data from a telco plus this data from a bank plus this data from um, an energy company means this workflow. And we are templatizing those, and we are building authoring tools that these entities don't have to go through a lot of use case generation. They can just plug and play these templates and build it. And the last few things that I share with you is that the way we are building this project, we are focusing on these 6 pillars to build them correctly. Ensuring that the privacy of the end user is protected, but also we build interfaces that are persuasive. Ken's group have done a lot of interesting work around this notion of persuasive cities, which is great. What you offer the citizens and residents should actually drive value for them in order to engage further. We are looking at societal impact, like how do we build models that the information flows from communities to communities and increasing participation and that social dynamics, or as our colleague Sandy calls it, the social physics of it. The other interesting thing that I think, again, Ken's group is a leader in that, is that, well, centrality is going away. And I think COVID played a role there. In North American cities, we used to have people taking the train, coming to the hub of the city. In many cases, we called it downtown, and then they went back. People are now very distributed. So are you going to have local hubs in each communities? And as a result, infrastructure spending will be distributed accordingly rather than building massive centralized infrastructure in highly dense urban areas. The other interesting thing for us when we look at this is the regulation aspect, the tax aspect, the zoning aspect. Like if you have such multi-use environments, right? And data is enabling those vertical boundaries to go away. Well, how are you going to manage zoning? What if we now have offices and we work with a lot of growth companies that like, well, I want to have a daycare at my office because I have a lot of young parents. Well, liability, zoning issues. Can algorithms help with that? Can data help with that? Can context awareness help with that? That based on density, based on occupancy, you can actually come up with adaptive models. And the last thing, which is basically the key driver of this, is data, not just the data itself, but accessing the data, governance around the data, explainability, auditability, transparency. But at the same time, how do you educate communities on these topics that they are comfortable, that are creative? And I think that requires that interdisciplinary view that we shared with you. So the last question we share with you, and then we'll move into conversation, is this. This is kind of you can type anything you want. What are some of the other consideration in ensuring that data privacy in a connected community data exchange is being handled correctly? There are rightful views that, hey, this is not going to go anywhere. People are not going to share data. And we have seen communities like that rightfully, they don't have the trust in sharing that data with anybody. So if that, and there may be other ways that, yes, we learned a lot, and these are some of the new ways. So feel free to answer that question again, and then I'll open it up for question. And I think we have about 20 minutes or so to have some good conversations together. Let me go back to my Menti and Ost. Perfect. So keep them coming if you want. We will review the questions together, and I will share all of these with the participants through our colleagues, so you can have some of these as takeaways. Let's see what we have here. As you're answering these, I'll review these, and then we'll open it up. Again, let's see what we have done today as part of the workshop. Rank the reasons that Sidewalk Labs failed. I think number one is data privacy, or the perception of data privacy, that we could not, again, it goes back to literacy. We could not educate the public on how their data is being used. Regulation, stakeholder management, cost, and technology. Second question, how willing are you to share these data types with a local community? You can see that people are very reserved, at least in our group, to share transaction and financial data. That itself can be a good review and research topics, but they are more keen to share profile data. Location, this is a very big topic that we can discuss further, and of course, key life events. So as you can see, in some cases, when the data is more aggregated, perhaps you can correlate it with more confidence in sharing. When it's very granular and specific, again, people are not very comfortable. Which existing entity can have a high potential to act as a data hub? It seems that everyone agrees that they trust a non-for-profit or a charitable organization more than a retailer. So we will discuss the bank and the non-for-profit. Very beautiful tag cloud, technology areas, blockchain is there, security, 5G, public access, very cool. Robotics, interesting. And then the last one, key considerations. This is a very good takeaway, transparency, trust. Trust is something that I think can be quantified way better when we are building these, and storytelling becomes very important here. That's why that interdisciplinary view is important. Trust means different things to different people. It's very correlated with time. How do you tell stories and build narratives that can really engage communities better here? So with that, I hope we could summarize at least our view. Again, these are workshops. The more fluid they are, the better. You heard from Sheldon on Sidewalk. You participated. You heard about some of the things we do in our Toronto lab, and would always love to hear your views and hopefully advance our collaboration. So with that, let's chat. Maybe Maggie, you can share it. I don't know how we want to do this, but yeah.
Yeah, everyone, let's open it up. So if you have questions, I think it'd be great if you want to just open up your microphone and go ahead and ask. You're also certainly welcome to type them in the chat if that's better for you, and we'll read them. But let's get it started. Open up your mics. What are you thinking? What did you find? What did you see here? I've seen an active chat today, so lots of folks sort of discussing throughout the workshop.
Ashish here. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
go ahead, Ashish.
All right, Hossein, I think it's a great insight. Thanks for sharing. And I just posted one question, when you said the local bank can be trusted and can become a data hub. So I do have few comments or kind of, thoughts that how do we make sure the banks doesn't become a Google of the local area, right? So number one. Second is, there would be a merger acquisitions of the bank, right? So how do you make sure the data regulations goes along with the merger and acquisitions? Because once the merger happens, it depends on the parent company to override, everything. So these are the two questions I have.
Very good point, Ashish. I share my views, but again, would love to hear everyone's opinion. If I had to choose, if I didn't have the capital and all that to go and build my own hubs, which most likely from a business point of view, that's the case, I would still choose a bank. And I tell you why. Um, some of it is because of the corporate and the market dynamics. First of all, and I can only talk about the North American context here, so please don't, it may be very different in other parts of the world. First of all, these are regulated entities. So they already have to play based on a playbook in terms of how they share data, their governance. There are always anomalies, and we hear that in the news. So first of all, they are regulated. The second thing is that if you compare a big tech firm versus a bank, when you go and say yes to terms and condition on all these popular social networking platforms that you use, in most cases, you are giving up the rights of your data. But when you go deposit a check at a bank, it's your money. You commit to a legal contract with the bank to manage that fund on your behalf. You can, depending on which instrument you put that money in, you can withdraw the money right away, you may collect interest. So there is a legal contract there that the banks are already familiar with. Now, they use those legal contracts with financial assets. It's easier for them to apply similar legal contracts when it comes to data assets. That's why, again, I think bank is in a good situation because relatively, I use the term relatively, the trust is there. When you deposit your check, you're kind of comfortable that the bank is not going to run out of money anytime soon. And the last thing I say is that for these data hubs to emerge, the physics of data is as such that it can grow exponentially if you have network effects around that. Caesar, I think one of our former colleagues, had a book about this, that how information grows. Now, think about every single entity in that city or that community needs a bank, right? So when you have the data there, but in a very disjointed manner, right? If you can use them correctly in a privacy preserved fashion, you have the trust, you have the end customer, you have the interconnect with most of the community. So why not repurposing it? And I share one last thing with you and would love to hear your opinion. About 2 years ago, actually, Sheldon and I had a meeting with um, our national university network, the registrars of the universities, that they were complaining. It's very difficult to transmit academic transcript from one Canadian university to another. The student had to go pick it up, drop it off, mail it, stamp it, all of that. So they wanted to actually invest significantly in building a network so that this interoperability can happen from a data point of view between our universities. And our view was that, hold on, you have banks, we use them to transfer money. Why don't you partner with banks so we use the same rails to transfer academic records, maybe later on health records, right? We are not ready there, but the physical layers of what we need is ready. It needs a new transaction layer on top of that. That's why, Ashish, I suggested banks. But of course, you know, there are lots of other things. Hey, you never know what happens in a bank and lots of what ifs. But that's why, as a hypothesis, we shared bank as a potential.
And just to add to that, I think the open banking movement that we see recently in North America as well as the rest of the world, it does help in terms of preventing banks to become those monopolies like Google or Amazon you see. So because open banking is about giving the power of control of your data back to the end users. So it's enabling banks to create APIs to share data with other applications, for example, like a third-party fintech apps. So in this way, all the use cases, capabilities, technology, IP is not all centralized inside the banks. They could be shared across the ecosystem. And I think this is something that we're trying to strive for with the Canar project that Hossein just mentioned.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to me as well. And maybe, I just put a point as well, the having the right to delete, right? So the moment I want the bank not to share my information, I should be able to delete my record. I think the right to delete along with whatever you said will make sense. Yeah.
Let's hear from Richard. Richard does a lot of work in this area. Go ahead, Richard. You're on mute.
Thanks. It's an interesting question I hadn't thought of in framing this way before, but so one of the questions I often have is people feel overwhelmed by their technology already in a day, right? The amount of effort it takes to figure out my phone wants me to update the operating system, but if I do, I know it's going to break this other app that I have, and my backups aren't fully maintained, etc. People feel like it's a lot to manage. And so one of the questions is, when we go into a world of sharing more data in return for more benefit, it still feels like there's a lot of friction. There's a lot of, I don't really understand what I'm doing, and how much time do I want to put into it, and I'm not sure what I get from it. What I like, and I hadn't thought of before in your bank idea, is the metaphor of a financial instrument of value is the same thing applied to my data, meaning banks have lots of different instruments. If you know a lot about what you're doing and your money, you can day trade. You can be involved in every little aspect of managing your money. If you don't, you can get a robo-advisor. You can get a money manager. You can just say, well, I'm putting my thing here and leaving it alone and letting some, fire and forget system take care of it. And banks have all of those variations. That's an interesting parallel from an interface question, from a time and energy question. That maybe I can choose, do I need an automated agent that's negotiating on my behalf, but I had to configure it? Do I want, I'm going to gain maybe less benefit if I just put it fire and forget, but that's less mental overhead. So anyway, that was just an observation that I think you're right that that banks serve a lot of different kinds of clients, depending on their energy and knowledge, and data management is a similar problem.
And one thing I want to add for colleagues as part of the CSL ecosystem, Richard actually teaches a course as part of our group, which is more focused on data ethics and data governance. So if you're interested in those, we are actually making these courses hopefully more available to the network online. So feel free to reach out to Richard. It's an interesting course. Okay, other comments or questions?
So Hossein, sorry, there's a siren just as I started speaking. Sheldon did a beautiful job of summarizing the 8 reasons why the Sidewalk Lab project failed, ending with what he thought was the most important, which is the lack of trust that's come up a number of times in this session. And he said trust must be earned. I'm wondering if Sheldon or others might sketch out a new and better process that would build trust and help create consensus for how to build a better community. Say if this Toronto project was to go ahead, led by a different group, for example.
That's a really, really tough question. I wrote in the chat that trust is a behavior, and it's when I believe you and I have basically shared values, and therefore, if you mess up, I forgive you because I believe that you were actually pursuing a value that I shared with you. So I give you a lot of freedom uh, to roam, to experiment, to navigate, to be successful, and to have failure because I trust your values. And so I don't see trust as a checklist like when you do a financial audit. And so the only thing I could think of, Kent, on this is that you can't jump into a project by winning an RFP and saying, I'm here. I have to know who you are. I have to see you as a member of my community. I have to see you doing things that I see as value, and then I begin to trust you. And then, Kent, if you say, I'm going to do a city, a smart city, I say, well, I know Kent. I know his values, and then I give you that freedom. I don't know how you do it by winning an RFP because I don't know who you are. And trust doesn't come from a checklist. And I think the moment that you rely on a checklist, it's not going to work.
So you're saying you think it needs to be more of a bottom-up, community-led process with organizations that already have a high level of trust. Is that basically
Or
what
you
you're saying?
or you bring people into what you want to do that have demonstrated in their community that level of trust. And that's also when I mentioned you needed the person that is trusted to be the communicator or the auditor, in quotes, of the project. But it's got to come from within. It can't come that that very smart people, and they were very smart, come from New York City and then say, I'm here, trust me, right? It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Well, I love that you mentioned within, because that's the theme of this entire City Science Summit, cities within. So innovation
Right,
within
right.
communities. Thanks for that plug.
Not it was it wasn't was it it was sincere, let me put it that way.
Okay. Thank you.
Hussein, could I mention one thing while I got the mic?
Please, yeah.
So it's on the trust, and it has to do with banks. Banks have a responsibility to their shareholders to bring a financial return. So if you create the bank as a center, I would trust them more if I really understood that there is a financial return that they would earn by being that center. If all of a sudden it was goodwill, I wouldn't trust them because I know that they are not responding to their shareholders. So you have to be able to get aligned with the values. Like the banks are extremely trustworthy. I agree. But but they do it because they want to make money, right? And they got to deliver to their shareholders, and breaking the trust with citizens will damage dramatically their return to their shareholders. So they should never do it for free, is my point of view. They should do it aligned with their values. And then I would say, then understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. But if they said, I'm going to do it because I'm a good corporate citizen for free, I'd say, I don't trust you. So just a bit of a comment.
This is interesting that you mentioned that, Sheldon, and one of the key work streams of the new grant is exactly that, that in a nutshell, the way I see it is that a lot of banks at the moment are being assessed by their AUM, or assets under management, or their financial assets. So what we are basically saying, well, you can have data as an asset, data under management. So you're becoming this trust hub, and then we measure you based on some very new dynamics on how you interconnect communities with each other. So if you can now introduce regulations that is not necessarily based on the old protocol on how you regulate a bank, but a new protocol on how you measure a bank, even a success of a bank based on data network effects, then it will also introduce new business models for them, which is very interesting. So the example is this. I don't want to make it too hands-on, but think about it. With open banking and all these regulations, and assuming that you're going to own all of your data and you have enough storage capability, you have enough compute capability on your phone, that you can store all of that data and majority of that data on an encrypted chipset on your phone, you can say, you can just pass tokens to your trusted entities and say, hey, bank, I want you to go and see if you can reduce my utility bill by 20% in the next 3 months, right? This is where you can run all sort of cool AI algorithms and all that. And then when you do that, there is a value for you. So the bank now is being managed by how many entities are you connecting using data, and that will have a formulation in the future. So those are some of the new things that I think is interesting for our group, and hopefully the broader group to look into.
Yeah, I think another value add, another benefit for the banks to be sitting inside or in the middle of this data exchange is as you think about, what are some of the biggest cost factors in banks today, right? So risk management, being able to adjudicate, assess how risky this loan is one huge factor in terms of how profitable this bank will be. And so if you think about all these wealth of data that can potentially sit inside the community hub, banks can leverage these data and provide draw insights, provide predictions, generate predictions, and then use this to generate a much more efficient, perhaps interest rates, better terms for the businesses, the merchant inside these communities. So this creates a win-win situation where the banks, their strategy can grow with the community at the same time, benefiting the community by providing a more efficient injections of capital.
And so just to add on to what David just said, so if you think about the consortium image that has been presented on one slide where the bank is in the middle and you have a circle of other companies connected on the outside as a wheel, to David's point about risk assessment, we can develop models that are a little bit more relevant because we're generating this aggregated data asset with relevant data. So if you think about machine learning and AI, the accuracy and predictability of the models really depends on the quality and the sources of the data. And as we add a larger data asset with relevant data, relevant being the keyword. So it's not always necessarily that adding more data to the problem will generate better outputs. It's if we have more relevant data that are coming from community partners, we will be able to develop these better models that will ultimately benefit the greater consortium. Now, Hussein, as I'm monitoring the chat, there are a couple of really, really good questions. One that just actually came in from Alex Burke. So he's saying people already share their location and demographic data with mobile apps / third parties. Have we explored using this already shared data?
Well, from a technical point of view, yes, but the question is that who are they sharing that data with now, and what are the legal boundaries around that? Like if they are sharing it with Google, there's no way I can get access to that, right? So the question is, yes, you can use the same type of sensing to share data, especially location on so many different granular level, but who are you sharing it with? And based on what legal contract are you sharing it with, right? And the interesting thing for us is to really give control to the user on to what level they want to share that data, with whom, and what are the kill switches that they want to have that they can quickly have this right to be forgotten anytime that they are not comfortable with. So as you see, it's not just a question of data and the algorithms that share it, it's also that design and literacy that you build on the digital channel so anyone can understand the power of their data and they can use their data as an asset to generate value. That is missing. That's why things are happening too much in silos. Designers are building amazing user interfaces, but they are not built around this notion of privacy preservation, or some people call it privacy by design. That's why kind of building that interconnection will become very interesting.
Great, thank you, Hussein. I see also there's lots of folks from the City Science Network, so I'm curious about perspectives from other places. I see people online from Taipei, from Vietnam, from Guadalajara. So we're here together actually until 10:10, so let's keep the questions coming. As we've mentioned, it's a really collaborative group, so definitely chime in and let us know what you think. I've been chatting with a colleague a bit in private chat about communities that are lower trust and parts of the world that might be low trust, and maybe also technology adoption there is more difficult. Have you considered this complexity or how it might work or unfold?
I think other colleagues can also comment on that. Kent and I and a number of other colleagues are discussing an immediate project, which is for a community that perhaps I can refer to it as low trust with data and technology. And again, our view is that the base, the infrastructure layer is the same, but the way you bring it to this community, the narrative that you use, even the interfaces you use, they have to be fundamentally different. So I totally agree. I think it's a very, very valid comment. And I just say it's all about educating the public and truly transparently tell them, I'm not here to misuse the data. I'm empowering you and telling you your data is very powerful and you can use it to generate these values for communities. So it's a combination of public policy, narrative, all of that. Yeah, I don't know, Kent, if you want to comment on that as well. I know we discussed it.
Well, one of the projects that we're involved with has one goal the development of a community data co-op and another community benefit programs like fractional ownership. The goal there is to partner with, to Sheldon's point, partner with a local organization, a community land trust that already has a high level of trust in that community, and that they would take the lead and be the interface to the community, and they have a better understanding of what the community will and will not accept, and what the benefits to the community are, as opposed to what we might imagine they should be. And we're just beginning that process, but I think it's absolutely essential to have people already in the community that can take the lead.
What else, everyone? Let's give some space just in case there's anyone new who wants to chime in. Go ahead and let us know, put it in the chat, open your mic. We're here for you.
So in the
Good
meantime,
morning.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Raquel from Guadalajara. And well, I've been trying to process all this thing because the truth is our reality is very different. We are in a society where criminality has a big impact. And not only that, telephone scams. So there is a lot of mistrust from everybody. So I guess our mindset is not trust anybody, and that's the way we are kind of configured now because of the situation that we're living in. So I know that the political discourse has a lot of I think it will be more complicated for us. We're working with informal communities where they are already in a situation of insecurity, and so I think I don't know. I would like to hear your intakes about that, but considering the different mindset that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, Rochelle, I think what I can highlight that I think you said it very well is that I think you highlighted a very good point that before you even talk about data and all these technicalities, figure out the trust element first. When you have that as a nucleus, then you can use data and the physics of data around that. But this notion of, okay, let's build it first and then let's do things around trust, I think you're basically saying, which I agree, it has to be reversed. Like, first we need to address the trust factor, and then start seeing, how we can use data to empower community. There are initiatives like that around the world, not just here, data for good and, a lot of interesting open data policies. But I think one thing that is coming very well out of this workshop is that trust is the number one pillar that needs to be addressed before we discuss the technicalities of such projects.
Mhm.
Make just a quick comment on that question. If you are in a society that people in power can just do things by monitoring or whatever they want to do, that's not Toronto, that's for sure, and it isn't the Sidewalk Labs experiment. So if city building is an imposition by authorities on data surveillance, collecting data, etc., that's a different subject altogether. My subject is when you're in a democratic society and it is the people that are going to ultimately decide on smart city. Those were the lessons learned. But if you're in a society where it's that you don't have that choice to oppose, then those are different lessons. Those are not the lessons that I was talking about.
Yeah, certainly complex. Definitely different things to consider in different places. Benjamin, I see your hand up. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. I see a lot of focus on this issue of trust, and for me, the method by which it was handled, I sort of respectfully challenge the fact that the question of like what institutions would best handle data centers. I don't feel like that's the correct question. I think if trust is truly the problem, you truly want to address it, then why not take a radical perspective or a perspective of the younger generation that are going for? There's amazing technologies with decentralization that are far more decentralized than um, giving information to a series of banks, which I also challenge that is in any way decentralized. A lot of the younger generation have no trust in those institutions. They have no relationship to those institutions. The rise of Bitcoin is a fantastic example of this. If you really want to align and build trust with the coming generation and into the future, I feel like you need to offer an opportunity for people to charter their own organizations using trustless technology where there's no regulatory capture, there's no conflict of interest of the organization that gives you finance having all your data, which I think is a horrible idea, by the way. These trustless systems are worthy and they work, and I feel like this is a better perspective from which to approach this issue of trust. Comments and thoughts?
I think it's very well said. I think approaching it from different views and again, I think sessions like this are exactly for that, to hear different viewpoints. On one side, I think you highlighted very well. There are also other things we are thinking of. Okay, if you want to do that and you want to learn from that, you need to use some existing capabilities to have those learning outcomes. And then hopefully all of these will come together as a program and as a takeaway to understand how to build these things. I think like all things that has happened, you need to look at the whole spectrum without a bias, collect all that information, try it without, especially by having people's privacy in mind, and then come up with a framework. Again, this is the goal of this initiative, is to really introduce new frameworks with pros and cons that others can make decisions on. And I think your viewpoint is very valid. And also, we are thinking about all the other elements that, okay, if you want to build these, how do you scale it? Because without participation, we are not going to have enough proof points to demonstrate things. Yeah. So I don't have any disagreement there. I think it's we need all of these inputs to figure out what this framework is going to look like.
Yeah, and we see even more comments about what is this framework, what is the regulation, and what does it look like? And then also definitely remarking on the complexity of this in different locations. So I think that lets us know that it's a continued conversation and a continued discussion, certainly with the lab in Toronto and throughout the City Science Network. Just about time to close. Any closing remarks for us from Hussein or the Toronto team?
Thank you. As always, it's great to collaborate with the broader global team, and yeah, looking forward to staying in touch. And hopefully next year we can see each other in person, maybe in Toronto. So we'll figure it out.